The Office of Strategic Services was a United States intelligence agency formed during World War II. It was the wartime intelligence agency, and a predecessor of the Central Intelligence Agency. The OSS was formed in order to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for the branches of the United States Armed Forces. Other functions of the OSS included the use of propaganda, subversion, and post-war planning. Origin: prior to the formation of the OSS, American intelligence had been conducted on an ad hoc basis by the various departments of the executive branch, including the State, Treasury, Navy, and War Departments. It had no overall direction, coordination, or control. The U.S. Army and U.S. Navy had separate code-breaking departments, Signals Intelligence Service and OP-20G. The FBI was responsible for domestic security and anti-espionage operations. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was concerned about American intelligence deficiencies. On the suggestion of William Stevenson, the senior British intelligence officer in the Western Hemisphere, Roosevelt requested that William J. Donovan draft a plan for an intelligence service based on the British Secret Intelligence Service in Special Operations Executive. Colonel Donovan was employed to evaluate the global military position in order to offer suggestions concerning American intelligence requirements because the U.S. did not have a central intelligence agency. After submitting his work, Memorandum of Establishment of Service of Strategic Information, Colonel Donovan was appointed as the Coordinator of Information on July 11, 1941, heading the new organization known as the Office of the Coordinator of Information. Thereafter the organization was developed with the assistance of the British. Donovan had responsibilities but no actual powers, and the existing U.S. agencies were skeptical if not hostile. Until some months after Pearl Harbor, the bulk of OSS intelligence came from the UK. The first OSS agents were trained by British Security Coordination in Canada, until training stations were set up in the US with guidance from BSc instructors, who also provided information on how the SOE was arranged and managed. The British immediately made available their shortwave broadcasting capabilities to Europe, Africa and the Far East, and provided equipment for agents until American production was established. The Office of Strategic Services was established by a presidential military order issued by President Roosevelt on June 13, 1942, to collect and analyze strategic information required by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to conduct special operations not assigned to other agencies. During the war, the OSS supplied policymakers with facts and estimates, but the OSS never had jurisdiction over all foreign intelligence activities. The FBI was left responsible for intelligence work in Latin America, and the Army and Navy continued to develop and rely on their own sources of intelligence. Activities. For the duration of the World War II, the Office of Strategic Services was conducting multiple activities and missions, including collecting intelligence by spying, performing acts of sabotage, waging propaganda war, organizing and coordinating anti-Nazi resistance groups in Europe, providing military training for anti-Japanese guerrilla movement in Asia, among other things. At the height of its influence during WWII, the OSS employed almost 24,000 people. From 1943 to 1945, the OSS played a major role in training Kuomintang troops in China and Burma, and recruited Kachin and other indigenous irregular forces for sabotage, as well as guides for Allied forces in Burma fighting the Japanese Army. Among other activities, the OSS helped arm, train and supply resistance movements, including Mao Zedong's Red Army in China and the Viet Minh in French Indochina, in areas occupied by the Axis powers during World War II. OSS officer Archimedes Paty played a central role in OSS operations in French Indochina and met frequently with Ho Chi Minh in 1945. In the 40th Bomb Group Association Memories issue number March 14, 1987 date of event, summer of 1944 to early spring, 1945 date written, September, 1986 written by, Louis Jones. The Dixie mission in China was composed of approximately 20 people, including 2 OSS officers. One of the greatest accomplishments of the OSS during World War II was its penetration of Nazi Germany by OSS operatives. The OSS was responsible for training German and Austrian individuals for missions inside Germany. Some of these agents included exiled communists and Socialist Party members, labor activists, anti-Nazi prisoners of war, and German and Jewish refugees. The OSS also recruited and ran one of the war's most important spies, the German diplomat Fritz Kolb. In 1943, the Office of Strategic Services set up operations in Istanbul. Turkey, as a neutral county during the Second World War, was a place where both the Axis and Allied powers had spy networks. The railroads connecting Central Asia with Europe as well as Turkey's close proximity to the Balkan states placed it at a crossroads of intelligence gathering. The goal of the OSS Istanbul operation called Project Net 1 was to infiltrate and extenuate subversive action in the old Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires. Head of operations at OSS Istanbul was a banker from Chicago named Lanning Packy McFarland who maintained the cover story as a banker for the American Lend-Lease program. McFarland hired Alfred Schwartz, a Czechoslovakian engineer and businessman who came to be known as Dogwood, and ended up establishing the Dogwood information chain. Dogwood in turn hired a personal assistant named Walter Arndt and established himself as an employee of the Istanbul Western Electric Company. Through Schwartz and Arndt the OSS was able to infiltrate anti-fascist groups in Austria, Hungary and Germany. Schwartz was able to convince Romanian, Bulgarian, Hungarian and Swiss diplomatic couriers to smuggle American intelligence information into these territories and establish contact with elements antagonistic to the Nazis and their collaborators. Couriers and agents memorized information and produced analytical reports. When they were not able to memorize effectively, they recorded information on microfilm and hid it in their shoes or hollowed pencils. Through this process, information about the Nazi regime made its way to McFarland and the OSS in Istanbul and eventually to Washington. While the OSS Dogwood chain produced a lot of information, its reliability was increasingly questioned by British intelligence. Eventually by May 1944, through collaboration between the OSS, British intelligence, Cairo and Washington, the entire Dogwood chain was found to be unreliable and dangerous. Planting phony information into the OSS was intended to misdirect the resources of the Allies. Schwartz's Dogwood chain, which was the largest American intelligence gathering tool in occupied territory, was shortly thereafter shut down. The OSS purchased Soviet code and cipher material from a copyright migrant copyright Finnish army officers in late 1944. Secretary of State Edward Stettinius, Jr., protested that this violated an agreement President Roosevelt made with the Soviet Union not to interfere with Soviet cipher traffic from the United States. General Donovan might have copied the papers before returning them the following January, but there is no record of Arlington Halls receiving them, and CIA and NSA archives have no surviving copies. This codebook was in fact used as part of the VNONA decryption effort, which helped uncover large-scale Soviet espionage in North America. Weapons and gadgets. The OSS espionage and sabotage operations produced a steady demand for highly specialized equipment. After realizing that, General Donovan invited experts, organized workshops and funded labs that formed a core of the later established research and development branch. Boston chemist Stanley P. Lovell became its first head, and Donovan humorously called him his Professor Moriarty. Throughout the war years, the OSS research and development was successfully adapting Allied weapons and espionage equipment, and producing its own line of novel spy tools and gadgets, including silenced pistols, lightweight submachine guns, Beano grenades that exploded upon impact, explosives disguised as lumps of coal or bags of Chinese flour, acetone time delay fuses for limpet mines, compasses hidden in uniform buttons, playing cards that concealed maps, a 16mm Kodak camera in the shape of a matchbox, tasteless poison tablets, and cigarettes laced with tetrahydrocannabinol acetate to induce uncontrollable chattiness, among others. In addition, innovative communication equipment was developed, such as wiretap gadgets, electronic beacons for locating agents, and the Joan Eleanor portable radio system that made possible for operatives on the ground to establish secure contact with a plane that was preparing to land or drop cargo. The OSS Research and Development also printed fake German and Japanese-issued identification cards, various passes, ration cards and counterfeit money. On August 28, 1943, Stanley Loveal was asked to make a presentation in front of a not very friendly audience of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, since the U.S. top brass were largely skeptical of all OSS plans beyond collecting military intelligence and were ready to split the OSS between the Army and the Navy. While explaining the purpose and mission of his department and introducing various gadgets and tools, he reportedly casually dropped into a wastebasket the a panic-inducing type of a device in the shape of a firecracker, which shortly produced a loud shrieking sound followed by a deafening boom. The presentation was interrupted and did not resume since everyone in the room fled. In reality, the jokingly named after a Hollywood star Lam for her ability to distract men, saved lives of some trapped OSS operatives. Not all projects worked. Some ideas were outright goofy, such as producing pathogenic synthetic goat dung in Project Capricious to spread anthrax by using flies among German troops in Spanish Morocco to prevent Spain from joining the Axis powers. Donovan was not informed about Project Capricious due to its uttermost secrecy. The Germans eventually evacuated and Operation Capricious was aborted. There were also ideas to introduce estrogen into Hitler's food to deprive him of his trademark moustache and a recognizable by all Germans a baritone voice. A more deadly plot included hiding a capsule with mustard gas in flowers to cause blindness among Nazi generals inside the German High Command headquarters. All in all, Stanley Loveal worked hard to level the playing field for the OSS in the WWII arena of espionage, and was later quoted saying, "It was my policy to consider any method whatever that might aid the war, however unorthodox or untried." In 1939, a young physician named Christian J. Lambertson developed an oxygen rebreather set and demonstrated it to the OSS after already being rejected by the U.S. Navy in a pool at a hotel in Washington, D.C. In 1942 the OSS not only bought into the concept, they hired Lambertson to lead the program and build up the dive element for the organization. His responsibilities included training and developing methods of combining self-contained diving and swimmer delivery, including the Lambertson Amphibious Respiratory Unit for the OSS Operational Swimmer Group. Growing involvement of the OSS with coastal infiltration and water-based sabotage eventually led to creation of the OSS Maritime Unit. Dissolution into other agencies. After victory in Europe in May 1945, the OSS was better able to concentrate on operations in Japan. 1 month after the war was won in the Pacific Theater of Operations, on September 20, 1945, President Truman signed Executive Order 9621, which came into effect as of October 1, 1945. Thus in the following days from September 20, 1945, the functions of the OSS were split between the Department of State and the Department of War. The State Department received the Research and Analysis branch of OSS, which was renamed the Interim Research and Intelligence Service and headed by U.S. Army Colonel Alfred McCormack. This was later renamed the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. The War Department took over the Secret Intelligence and Counter-Espionage branches, which were then housed in a new office created for just this purpose, the Strategic Services Unit. The Secretary of War appointed Brigadier General John Magruder as the director to oversee the liquidation of the OSS, and more importantly, the preservation of the clandestine intelligence capability of the OSS. In January 1946, President Truman created the Central Intelligence Group, which was the direct precursor to the CIA. The assets of the SSU, which now constituted a streamlined nucleus of clandestine intelligence, was transferred to the CIG in mid-1946 and reconstituted as the Office of Special Operations. Next, the National Security Act of 1947 established the United States' first permanent peacetime intelligence agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, which then took up the functions of the OSS. The direct descent into the paramilitary component of the OSS is the Special Activities Division of the CIA. Facilities, Prince William Forest Park was the site of an OSS training camp that operated from 1942 to 1945. Area C, consisting of approximately 6,000 acres, was used extensively for communications training, whereas Area A was used for training some of the OGs. Catoctin Mountain Park, now the location of Camp David, was the site of OSS Training Area B. Congressional Country Club in Bethesda, Maryland was the primary OSS training facility. The London branch of the OSS, its first overseas facility, was at 70 Grosvenor Street, W1. The facilities of the Catalina Island Marine Institute at Toyon Bay on Santa Catalina Island, Calif., are composed of a former OSS survival training camp. The National Park Service commissioned a study of OSS National Park training facilities by Professor John Chambers of Rutgers University. At Camp X, at Ajax, near Oshawa, Ontario, Canada, an assassination and elimination training program was operated by the British Special Operations executives such as William E. Fairbairn and Eric A. Sykes. Many members of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services also were trained there. It was dubbed the School of Mayhem and Murder by George Hunter White, who trained at the facility in the 1950s. Personnel. The names of all OSS personnel and documents of their OSS service, previously a closely guarded secret, were released by the U.S. National Archives on August 14, 2008. Among the 24,000 names were those of Julia Child, Ralph Bunch, Arthur Goldberg, Saul K. Padova, Arthur Schlesinger, J.R., Bruce Sundlun, and John Ford. The 750,000 pages in the 35,000 personal files include applications of people who were not recruited or hired, as well as the service records of those who were. Major League Baseball player Mo Berg was recruited by the OSS in 1943 because of his language skills, assigned to the Secret Intelligence Branch, and took part in missions in the Caribbean, South America, France, England, Norway, Italy, and the Balkans. Later, Berg was briefed in nuclear physics, and sent to Saar-1 Quarterich, Switzerland, posing as a Swiss physics student, with the mission of attending a lecture at the Technische Hochschule by Germany's top nuclear scientist, Werner Heisenberg. His orders were to kill the scientist if he determined that the Germans were far along in their efforts to build an atomic weapon. He found that the scientist was not a threat. Berg was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but declined to accept it as he was forbidden from saying what he had done to receive the award. He is the only former Major League Baseball player whose baseball card is displayed at CIA headquarters. One of the forefathers of today's commandos was Navy Lieutenant Jack Taylor. He was sequestered by the OSS early in the war and had a long career behind enemy lines. Taro and Mitsuyashima, both Japanese political dissidents who were imprisoned in Japan for protesting its regime, worked for the OSS in psychological warfare against the Japanese Empire. Branches, detachments, in popular culture, films, the 1946 Paramount film OSS, starring Alan Ladd and Geraldine Fitzgerald, showed agents training and on a dangerous mission. Commander John Shaheen acted as technical advisor. The 1946 film 13 Rue Madeleine stars James Cagney as an OSS agent who must find a mole in French partisan operations. Peter Ortiz acted as technical advisor. The 1946 film Cloak and Dagger stars Gary Cooper as a scientist recruited to OSS to exfiltrate a German scientist defecting to the Allies with the help of a woman guerrilla and her partisans. E. Michael Burke acted as technical advisor. In the 2001 film franchise Spy Kids, the Cortez family is working for an organization called the OSS. In the 2006 film The Good Shepherd, Matt Damon plays Edward Wilson, a Skull and Bones recruit who joins the OSS to help with a mission in London. He quickly gains rank as the head of the newly formed CIA's counterintelligence service. The 2008 biographical film Flash of Genius is about famed American inventor and OSS veteran, Robert Kearns. In the 2008 film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it is indicated that Indiana Jones worked for the OSS, attaining the rank of colonel. In the 2009 film Inglourious Basterds by Quentin Tarantino, the Bastards are members of OSS, although no such OSS unit ever actually existed. The 2009 film Julie and Julia includes flashback scenes depicting Julia Child's wartime service with the OSS. Television. In 1957 to 1958, Ron Randall starred in the series OSS. In the season 6 X-Files episode Triangle, the woman from the 1939 scenes portrayed by Gillian Anderson as Scully is a member of OSS. In season 3, episode Lang, H. of NCIS, Los Angeles, the OSS is mentioned as the predecessor of the CIA. Literature. The 1976 book A Man Called Intrepid, The Secret War by William Stevenson describes the operations of the OSS, particularly the role of Sir William Samuel Stevenson, head of British Security Coordination in New York, in its formation. He also authored a 1986 book entitled Intrepid's Last Case. The 1957 book You're Stepping on My Cloak and Dagger by Roger Wolcott Hall is a witty look at Hall's experiences with the OSS. The 1986 book Camp X by David Stafford is the most accurate account of the activities and personnel of Camp X, the secret agent training camp for sabotage and guerrilla warfare at Ajax near Oshawa, Ontario, Canada, that was administered by the British Special Operations Executive. Author W. E. B. Griffin's Honor Bound and Men at War series revolves around fictional OSS operations. A French pulp fiction series OSS 117, by author Jean Bruce, follows the adventure of Hubert Bonacieux de la Barthe, alias OSS 117, a French operative working for the OSS. The original series lasted from 1949 to 1963, until the death of Jean Bruce, and was continued by his wife and children until 1992. Numerous films were made from it in the 1960s, and in 2006 a nostalgic comedy was made, celebrating the spy movie genre, Cairo, Nest of Spies, with Jean Dujardin playing OSS 117. A sequel followed in 2009 called OSS 117, Lost in Rio. Comics. The OSS was a featured organization in DC Comics, introduced in GI Combat No. 192. Led by the mysterious Control, they operated as an espionage unit, initially in Nazi-occupied France. The organization would later become Argent. DC Comics superheroine Wonder Woman alter ego Diana Prince works for Major Steve Trevor at the OSS. In this position, she found herself privy to intelligence on Axis operations in the United States, and many time-foiled agents of Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy in their attempts to defeat the Allies and achieve world domination. Video games. In the Wolfenstein series of video games, the main character is a member of a fictional organization called the OSA, which is inspired by the OSS. Most games in the Medal of Honor video game franchise feature a fictional OSS agent as the main character. In the 2012 game Sniper Elite V2 the main protagonist is an OSS agent sniper. In Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, the main female character, Sophia Hapgood, is an OSS agent. See also: Operation Halliard, Operation Jedburgh, Operation Paperclip. OSS Detachment 101 operated in the China-Burma-India theater of World War II. Paramarines, Special Forces, Special Operations Executive, X2 Counter-Espionage Branch. References. Notes. Bibliography, Albarelli, H.P. A Terrible Mistake, The Murder of Frank Olson and the Sire Unregistered Trademark S. Secret Cold War Experiments ISBN 0-9777953-7-3 Aldrich, Richard J. Intelligence and the War Against Japan, Britain, America and the Politics of Secret Service, Alsop, Stewart and Braden, Thomas. Sub Rosa, The OSS and American Espionage, Bank, Aaron. From OSS to Green Berets, The Birth of Special Forces, Bartholomew Fee, Dixie are the OSS and Ho Chi Minh, Unexpected Allies in the War Against Japan, Bernstein, Barton J. Birth of the U.S. Biological Warfare Program Scientific American 256, 116 121, 1987. Brown, Anthony Cave. The Last Hero, Wild Bill Donovan, Casey, William J. The Secret War Against Hitler, Scheller, George C. The Secret War, The Office of Strategic Services in World War II, Dorodoff, Nicholas. The Catcher Was a Spy, The Mysterious Life of Moe Berg, Dulles, Alon. The Secret Surrender, Dunlop, Richard. Donovan, America Unregistered Trademark S. Master Spy, Ford, Corey. Donovan of OSS, Gross, Peter. Gentleman Spy, The Life of Alan Dulles, Hassel, A., and McRae, S., Alliance of Enemies, The Untold Story of the Secret American and German Collaboration to End World War II, Thomas Dunn Books, 2006, Hunt, E. Howard. American Spy, 2007, Jacob, J. Spies and Saboteurs, Anglo-American Collaboration and Rivalry in Human Intelligence Collection and Special Operations, 1940–45, Jones, Ishmael. The Human Factor, Inside the CIA's Dysfunctional Intelligence Culture, Katz, Barry M. Foreign Intelligence, Research and Analysis in the Office of Strategic Services, 1942–1945, Kent, Sherman. Strategic Intelligence for American Foreign Policy, Loviel, Stanley P. Of Spies and Stratagems. Pocket Books. Asina B0007 ESKHEA, Macintosh, Elizabeth P. Sisterhood of Spies, The Women of the OSS, Melton, H. Keith. OSS Special Weapons and Equipment, Spy Devices of World War II, Moulin, Pierre. U.S. Samurais in Briers, Persico, Joseph E. Piercing the Reich, The Penetration of Nazi Germany by American Secret Agents During World War II, Peterson, Neil H. From Hitler a Unregistered Trademark S. Doorstep, The Wartime Intelligence Reports of Alan Dulles, 1942–1945, Pink, Daniel C. Journey to Peking, A Secret Agent in Wartime China, Pink, Daniel C., Jones, Jeffrey M. T. and Pink, Charles T. Stalking the History of the Office of Strategic Services, An OSS Bibliography, Roosevelt, Kermit War Report of the OSS, 2 volumes, Rogers, David F. Creating the Secret State, The Origins of the Central Intelligence Agency, 1943–1947, Smith, Bradley F. and Agarossi, Elena. Operation Sunrise, The Secret Surrender, Smith, Bradley F. The Shadow Warriors, OSS and the Origins of the CIA, Smith, Richard Harris. OSS, The Secret History of America Unregistered Trademark S. First Central Intelligence Agency, Story, Donald P. The Intelligence War, Troy, Thomas F. Donovan and the CIA, A History of the Establishment of the Central Intelligence Agency, Troy, Thomas F. Wild Bill and Intrepid, Waller, John H. The Unseen War in Europe, Espionage and Conspiracy in the Second World War, Warner, Michael. The Office of Strategic Services America Unregistered Trademark S. First Intelligence Agency, U. Madchun. OSS in China, Prelude to Cold War, External Links, The Office of Strategic Services, America's First Intelligence Agency, National Park Service Report on OSS Training Facilities, Collection of documents at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Museum and Library, Part 1 and Part 2, The OSS Society, OSS Reborn,